The night Tina Wells became homeless, it was 31 degrees in Manhattan. She stood on the front steps of the brownstone she had helped pick out 3 years ago, wearing a silk robe and house slippers, her 7-month pregnant belly pressing against the cold November air. The locks had been changed. Her key didn't work. Her phone was still on the nightstand inside. And through the frosted glass of the front door, she could see her husband Anthony walking calmly up the stairs to the bedroom they once shared, not even looking back. Hello viewers, welcome to our story. Before we start, please like this video and subscribe. Also tell us in the comments where you are watching from. Is it New York, Australia, Canada, or South Africa? We really want to know. He had thrown her out like she was nothing. Tina banged on the door until her knuckles bled. She screamed his name until her voice cracked. She pressed the doorbell over and over, the chime echoing through the house like a sad little song nobody wanted to hear. Nothing. Anthony Wells, the 35 years old, founder and CEO of Wells Capital Group, one of the most powerful black men in New York finance, had made his decision. And when Anthony made a decision, the world was supposed to fall in line. But Anthony didn't know his wife. Not really. He never had. Let's go back 6 hours. That evening, Tina had been in the kitchen making jollof rice, Anthony's favorite. She had Anita Baker playing on the speaker, and she was humming along, stirring the pot with one hand and rubbing her belly with the other. Life wasn't perfect, but she was trying. She had been trying for years. Anthony came home at 9, which was late, even for him. He walked through the front door without saying hello, dropped his briefcase by the couch, and stood in the kitchen doorway with his arms crossed. "We need to talk," he said, when Tina turned down the music. "Okay, what's going on?" "I want you out of this house by tomorrow." She laughed. She actually laughed, because she thought he was joking. Anthony had a dry sense of humor sometimes, but his face didn't change. His jaw was set. His eyes were cold. "Anthony, what are you talking about?" "I said what I said. I want a divorce and I want you gone." Tina put the spoon down. Her hands were shaking. "We've been married for 4 years. I'm 7 months pregnant with your child. You can't just... I can do whatever I want. This is my house. My name is on the deed. My money paid for it." "Our money," Tina said, but her voice was getting smaller. "No," Anthony said. "Mine." And that was when Tina saw it. The look in his eyes that she had spent years pretending wasn't there. Contempt. Pure, deep contempt. Or like she was something stuck on the bottom of his shoe. "Is there someone else?" she asked. Anthony didn't answer. He didn't have to. Tina had seen the late-night texts, the cologne he never used to wear, the business trips that kept getting longer. She had asked him about it once, months ago, and he had told her she was crazy, paranoid, insecure. "You have 1 hour to pack a bag," Anthony said. "After that, I'm changing the locks." "Anthony, it's freezing outside. I'm pregnant. Where am I supposed to go?" "That's not my problem." Tina stared at him. This was the man she had married. The man she had supported when he was still working out of a studio apartment in the Bronx, eating dollar pizza and dreaming about Wall Street. She had typed his first business plan. She had proofread every pitch deck. She had taken out a loan in her name, $20,000, to help him start his first fund. And now he stood in a $4 million brownstone and told her it wasn't her problem. "I'm not leaving," Tina said. Anthony smiled. It was the worst smile she had ever seen. "Yes, you are." He walked upstairs. 20 minutes later, 2 men she had never seen before showed up at the door. Private security. Big guys in black suits. They didn't touch her, but they stood close. Too close. "Ma'am, Mr. Wells has asked you to leave the residence," one of them said. "This is my home. The property is in Mr. Wells's name. He's asked us to escort you out." Tina looked around for something, her phone, her purse, her coat. But Anthony had already moved them. The only thing she had was the robe on her back and the baby in her belly. The security guards walked her to the door, and when it closed behind her, She heard the deadbolt turn. That's how Tina Wells ended up standing on the steps of her own home, pregnant and freezing, with nothing. She walked 4 blocks before she found a payphone that actually worked. Her fingers were so cold she could barely press the buttons. She called the only person she could think of, her older sister, Denise. Denise picked up on the second ring. "Tina, why are you calling from a weird number?" "He threw me out," Tina said, and then she started crying so hard she couldn't speak. Denise was there in 20 minutes. She pulled up in her Honda, jumped out, wrapped her coat around Tina, and drove her to her apartment in Harlem. Denise didn't ask a lot of questions that night. She made Tina tea, gave her warm clothes, and let her cry until she fell asleep on the couch. But the next morning, Denise sat across from her sister at the kitchen table and said something that changed everything. "Tina, I love you, but I'm not going to let you be sad about this. That man tried to break you. Now you're going to break him." Tina wiped her eyes. "How?" "He has everything. The money, the lawyers, the connections. I don't even have my phone." Denise leaned forward. "You have something better. You have the truth." Here's what Anthony Wells didn't know about his wife. He thought he knew her. He thought she was the quiet girl from Queens who got lucky when he chose her. That's the story he told himself, and that's the story he told everyone else. At dinner parties, he would introduce her as "my beautiful wife," like she was a painting he had bought at auction. And he never mentioned what she brought to the table. He never mentioned what she gave up. But Tina remembered everything. She remembered the first time they met, at a networking event in downtown Manhattan. Anthony was 26 and broke, wearing a suit he had borrowed from his cousin. Tina was 20 and already working at an accounting firm while finishing her degree. He had walked up to her with a big smile and a business card that listed a company that didn't exist yet. She thought he was charming. She thought he was hungry in the right way. The way that meant he wanted to build something, not just take from others. She was wrong about that last part, but she wouldn't figure that out for years. Tina wasn't just some quiet woman who stood in his shadow. Before she married Anthony, and she had graduated summa cum laude from Howard University with a degree in accounting. She had worked at a mid-sized firm in Brooklyn for 3 years before Anthony convinced her to quit and focus on the family. She understood numbers. She understood money. And more importantly, she understood where Anthony's money actually came from. See, Wells Capital Group looked clean on the surface. Anthony was famous for it. The young black billionaire who built his empire from nothing. Magazine covers, charity galas, TED Talks. He was on the board of 3 nonprofits and donated millions to education programs in underserved neighborhoods. Everyone loved Anthony Wells. But Tina knew the truth. She knew because she had been there from the beginning. She had seen the first investors, the ones whose names never showed up in any filings. As she had heard the late-night phone calls with people Anthony later pretended he didn't know. She had watched him move money between accounts in ways that made her stomach turn. And she had kept quiet about all of it because she loved him, and because he told her it was temporary, and because she believed him when he said everything would be legitimate once they got big enough. But now she had nothing to lose. The first thing Tina did was get a lawyer. Not just any lawyer. She called Patricia Hammond, a divorce attorney in Midtown who was famous for one thing. She had never lost a case involving a wealthy husband. Patricia was 62 years old, had silver hair, sharp eyes, and absolutely no patience for men who thought their money made them untouchable. "Tell me everything," Patricia said at their first meeting. So Tina did. She talked for 3 hours. She told Patricia about the offshore accounts in the Cayman Islands. She told her about the shell companies Anthony used to hide assets. She told her about the investor money that had been redirected into personal accounts. She told her about the $20,000 she had loaned Anthony that was never paid back. Money that was technically the seed capital for his entire empire. Patricia listened without interrupting. When Tina was done, the lawyer leaned back in her chair and said, "Do you have proof?" Tina paused. "Some of it. I helped set up the early accounts. My name was on some of the original paperwork before he moved everything, and I kept copies of emails and documents from the first 2 years. I have them on a flash drive at my sister's place." Patricia smiled. "Then we're going to war." Anthony, meanwhile, was living his best life. Or at least he thought he was. The woman he had been seeing, a 24-year-old model named Giselle, had moved into the brownstone within a week of Tina leaving. Anthony took her to all the places he used to take Tina. The same restaurants, the same events. He posted pictures on social media like he hadn't just thrown his pregnant wife into the cold. His followers ate it up. Comments said things like, "power couple," and "goals." Anthony figured Tina would disappear quietly. She had no money, no phone, no connections without him. He had already told his lawyers to draft divorce papers that gave her nothing. No alimony, no share of the business, nothing. His legal team assured him they could make it stick. After all, the prenup she had signed was airtight. Or so he thought. What Anthony didn't know was that Tina had never actually signed the final version of the prenup. His lawyer had sent over a revised draft 2 days before the wedding, but in the chaos of last-minute planning, it was never executed. The version Tina signed was the original, the one that included a clause giving her 30% of all marital assets in the event of infidelity. Anthony had forgotten about that clause. His lawyers had forgotten about it too. But Patricia Hammond found it in about 15 minutes. Tina spent the next 2 months building her case. She worked from Denise's kitchen table, 8 months pregnant, sorting through financial records, emails, and documents. She contacted 3 former employees of Wells Capital Group who had left under suspicious circumstances. 2 of them agreed to talk. One of them, a former accountant named Marcus, had his own copies of financial records that showed discrepancies totaling over $40 million. Marcus had been fired after he raised concerns internally. Anthony had threatened to destroy his career if he ever spoke up. But Marcus was tired of being afraid. When Tina called him and explained what had happened to her, he said, "I've been waiting for someone to have the courage to do this." Patricia filed the divorce papers on a Tuesday morning in January. But that wasn't the bomb. The bomb was the separate complaint Tina filed with the Securities and Exchange Commission on the same day. The complaint detailed years of financial fraud, misappropriated investor funds, undisclosed offshore accounts, and falsified returns. It included documents, emails, and testimony from Marcus and the other former employees. Tina also did one more thing. She called a reporter at the New York Times, a woman named Jade Porter, who had been investigating Wells Capital Group for months but could never get anyone to go on record. Tina went on record. She told Jade everything. The story dropped on a Wednesday. The internet lost its mind. People shared the article thousands of times within the first hour. The comment sections were on fire. Women who had been through similar situations shared their own stories. Men who had admired Anthony turned on him overnight. His carefully built image, the inspirational rags-to-riches story, the philanthropist, the role model, shattered like cheap glass. Social media was brutal. Someone dug up an old interview where Anthony said, "No, the most important thing a man can do is protect his family." That clip got turned into a meme that went viral. Another person found a tweet Anthony had posted on Valentine's Day, calling Tina the love of my life and my rock. That one got 4 million views in 2 days. Black Twitter didn't hold back. The consensus was clear. Anthony Wells was a fraud in every way possible. Not just in business, but in life. Anthony Wells woke up that morning to 47 missed calls. The headline was simple: Wells Capital Group founder accused of massive financial fraud by estranged wife. The article was 6,000 words long. It included financial documents, quotes from former employees, and a timeline of alleged fraud going back to the company's founding. It also included the detail about Anthony locking his pregnant wife out of their home in freezing temperatures, a detail that turned the financial story into a human one. By noon, it was the most read article on the Times website. By 3 o'clock, it was trending on every social media platform. By 6 o'clock, the SEC had announced a formal investigation into Wells Capital Group. Anthony called his lawyers, he called his PR team, he called everyone he could think of. But the damage was already done. His investors started pulling out that same day. The first one to go was a pension fund that had put in $50 million. Then a university endowment. Then a tech billionaire who had been Anthony's biggest public supporter. One by one, they all ran. Within a week, and Wells Capital Group lost over $200 million in investor withdrawals. Anthony's personal accounts were frozen pending the SEC investigation. The board of every non-profit he sat on quietly removed his name. The speaking engagements dried up. The magazine that had put him on their cover 6 months ago ran a new story. The fall of Anthony Wells. And Giselle? She was gone before the weekend. She packed her bags on Thursday and moved in with a basketball player in Brooklyn. She didn't even leave a note. But Tina wasn't done. The divorce proceedings began in March. Patricia Hammond walked into that courtroom like a general walking onto a battlefield. Anthony's legal team, 3 of the most expensive lawyers in New York, tried everything. They argued the prenup was invalid. They argued Tina's claims were exaggerated. They argued she had no right to any of Anthony's assets because she hadn't worked during the marriage. Patricia destroyed every argument. She showed the court the original prenup with the infidelity clause. She presented evidence of Anthony's affair with Giselle, including hotel receipts, text messages, and testimony from a doorman at the brownstone who had seen Giselle coming and going for months before Tina was thrown out. She presented financial records showing that Tina's original $20,000 loan was never repaid and was, in fact, the capital that started the entire company. She also presented something else, a recording. Tina had found it on the flash drive from the early days. It was a voicemail Anthony had left her during a business trip back when things were good between them. In the voicemail, he said, "Baby, I couldn't have done any of this without you. You believed in me when nobody else did. Half of everything I build is yours. I mean that." The courtroom went quiet when that recording played. The judge awarded Tina 60% of all marital assets, full custody of their unborn child, the brownstone in Manhattan, and alimony of $25,000 per month. Anthony's lawyers tried to appeal, but the evidence was overwhelming. Tina gave birth to a baby girl in April. She named her Ava. She was in the hospital room, holding her daughter, when Denise walked in with flowers and a newspaper. The headline read, "SEC charges Wells Capital Group founder with securities fraud." Anthony Wells was formally charged with 12 counts of securities fraud, wire fraud, and investor deception. If convicted, and he faced up to 20 years in federal prison. His assets, what was left of them, was seized. The brownstone, the cars, the art collection, all of it. The only property not seized was the one the court had already awarded to Tina. Tina looked at the headline, then looked at her daughter. Ava had her eyes and Anthony's chin. She was beautiful and tiny and perfect. "You okay?" Denise asked. "Yeah," Tina said. "I think I am." 6 months later, Tina sat in the living room of the brownstone, her brownstone now, watching Ava sleep in a bassinet by the window. The place looked different. She had redecorated, taken down Anthony's awards and photos and replaced them with family pictures, her Howard diploma and Ava's baby photos. The place felt like home for the first time. Her phone buzzed. It was a message from Marcus, and the former accountant who had helped her. He had started a small consulting firm and wanted to know if Tina would be interested in partnering on a financial literacy program for young women in the Bronx. Tina smiled and typed back, "I'm in." She had also started something of her own. Using the settlement money, Tina created the Ava Wells Foundation, a non-profit that provided emergency housing and legal aid to women who had been financially abused by their partners. The foundation launched with a fundraising gala in September, and over 400 people showed up. Patricia Hammond gave the keynote speech. Jade Porter wrote a follow-up story for the Times. The foundation raised $2 million on its first night. Anthony's trial began in October. The courtroom was packed. Reporters, investors, or former employees. Everyone wanted to see how the mighty Anthony Wells would answer for what he'd done. His mother was there. She sat in the second row with a tissue pressed to her face, shaking her head like she still couldn't believe it. Anthony's younger brother, who had cut ties with him years ago over a business disagreement, was not there. He had told a reporter outside the courthouse, "I love my brother, but he did this to himself." The prosecution laid out the case methodically. They showed the jury spreadsheets, bank records, and email chains that painted a picture of a man who had spent years stealing from the people who trusted him. Former investors testified about losing their retirement savings. Former employees described a workplace built on fear and intimidation. A "we're asking the wrong question" could get you fired on the spot. Anthony's defense team tried to paint him as a visionary who had made some mistakes under pressure. They called character witnesses, old friends, a former professor, a pastor from his childhood church. But none of it was enough to outweigh the evidence. Tina didn't attend the trial. She didn't need to. She had already said everything she needed to say in her SEC complaint, her divorce testimony, and the record she had set straight with the public. She didn't want revenge to become her whole identity. She had a daughter to raise and a life to rebuild. But she did watch the verdict on the news. Anthony was found guilty on 9 of the 12 counts. The judge sentenced him to 14 years in federal prison. When the verdict was read, Anthony stood completely still, staring straight ahead. He didn't cry. He didn't react. He just stood there, like a man who had finally realized that the world he built was made of glass. And he had been the one throwing stones. A reporter caught Tina outside the brownstone that evening and asked her how she felt about the verdict. Tina thought about it for a moment. She thought about the night she stood on those steps, freezing and pregnant, with nothing. She thought about the years she had stayed quiet. The years she had made herself small so Anthony could feel big. She thought about Denise's words at the kitchen table. "You have the truth." "I feel free," Tina said. And she meant it. The thing about Anthony Wells was that he never understood what he had. He looked at Tina and saw a supporting character in his story. Someone to stand next to him at events. Someone to manage the house. Someone to make him look good. He never saw her as a whole person with her own intelligence, her own ambitions, her own strength. He thought throwing her out would erase her. He thought money and power made him untouchable. But power built on lies is like a building with no foundation. It looks tall and strong from the outside, but one good push and the whole thing comes down. Tina didn't push out of hate. She pushed because she had to. Because she had a daughter coming into the world, and she refused to let that little girl grow up thinking it was okay for someone to treat her mother that way. She refused to let Anthony's version of the story be the only one that mattered. And in the end, Tina didn't just survive. She built something real, something Anthony never could. And because everything he built was for himself, and everything Tina built was for others. 2 years later, the Ava Wells Foundation had helped over 300 women escape financially abusive situations. Tina was featured in Forbes, not as Anthony's wife, but as herself, Tina Wells, founder and CEO. Ava was 2 years old and already had her mother's stubborn streak and her grandmother's laugh. Tina still lived in the brownstone. She had thought about selling it. It carried a lot of memories, not all of them good. But she decided to keep it, not as a trophy, but as a reminder. A reminder that this was the place where someone tried to break her, and this was the place where she decided to stand up instead. Every morning, Tina would sit at the kitchen table with her coffee and watch the sunrise through the window. And sometimes Ava would crawl into her lap and play with her necklace, a simple gold chain with a small pendant that read, "Free." Denise had given it to her the day the divorce was finalized. "What does it mean?" Tina had asked. Denise smiled. Whatever you want it to mean. For Tina, it meant everything. It meant she was nobody's shadow, nobody's afterthought, nobody's supporting character. It meant she had walked through fire and come out the other side, not just whole, but stronger. And if you walked past that brownstone on a quiet morning, you might hear music coming from the kitchen, Anita Baker playing softly. And if you listened closely, you might hear a woman humming along, stirring something on the stove, living her life on her own terms. Not because someone let her, because she chose to.